We are now in Parsha Chayei Sarah. Interestingly enough, her name means the life of Sarah. And this takes place right after Sarah passes away. So you wonder, why is the Parsha called the life of Sarah? And it has to do with Sarah's spiritual tree that continued to bear fruit long after her physical life ended. So we see that in the earlier Parshas, that in Lech Lecha, God says to Avram, go forward to where I'm going to show you where to go. And there you're going to find yourself and also what I am bringing into the world. And then he's married to Sarah, and together they begin to build what God wants. So at this point, God has promised Abraham that he would have many, many, many generations from Yitzchak. But we haven't seen that yet. And God promised that we would have the land of Israel. But at this point in the Parsha, we haven't seen that yet either. So, and then Sarah passes away. So what's going to happen? And this is really, we're talking about generations and going forward. And how do we go forward? How do we all go forward? So the main three elements of the reading of this Parsha is the acquisition of the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, and Eliezer's mission to find a wife for Yitzchak, and Avram's subsequent remarriage and fathering of other children. But all of these are part of the continuing work of Sarah's spirit. In other words, she's still with us. Sarah's divine service was to be the wife and partner with Abraham. She nurtured his potential, making sure it was applied in the best way possible. She was not passive. She did what she could to make things move forward. Abraham gave kindness freely, granting hospitality to all the wayfarers. And he gave generously, not concerned about whether his influence would have a lasting impression. Just whoever you were, he wanted to teach you about God. Would that hold, and the person would hold that? He didn't really care. He just gave wherever he gave. But Sarah was different. She, especially after the birth of Yitzchak, worked to focus her husband's influence. She wanted to direct it to those recipients who would give it expression in holiness. In other words, for her, it wasn't enough that men are more chesed, they're out there, and women are more gevura, they're more focused. And he's doing fine out there. And she wants him to focus because she's completely aware that their purpose is to change the world. So what is going to happen that is going to make this go forward? That's her focus. So this pattern is reflected in Avram's children. He fathered many children, but Sarah only had one child, Yitzchak. So Abraham's great generosity caused him to consider even Yishmael worthy. And God, after God told him about the birth of Yitzchak, he prayed, may Yishmael live before you. He felt bad that when he was being told Yitzchak is going to be your main progeny, that was hard for him to say, well, can't everybody be good? But the truth is that not everybody was the same. And afterwards, although God had told Avram that I will keep my covenant with Yitzchak as a bond, Avram still loved Yishmael and wanted to raise him in his household. But it was Sarah who said, they have to go, because he did a lot of really bad things. He used to shoot bows and arrows at his little brother Yitzchak. He was wild and not helpful to Yitzchak's growing up. He didn't consider him like a brother. And so Sarah understood that all the members of Avram's household had to be individuals whose conduct reflected Avram's spiritual heritage. And that was her picture. Whatever is going to bring Avraham's spiritual heritage further, we go with this. If it does not, we do not go with it. If it tries to stop Avram's spiritual heritage, we have to send it away or get rid of it, because Avram's spiritual heritage needs to continue to go forward. So Sarah had major influence on the events that are described in this Torah reading. So even though she had already passed away, we see how everything was coming from Sarah and going forward. Abraham had already been promised the land of Israel, but the promise had not yet been realized. And he knew that he had to bury Sarah, and he felt prophetically that the place to bury was through the acquisition of Marat HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, and that would be the burial place. And he insisted that he had to buy it. You know, they said, bury her wherever you want to bury her. You want to bury her there, bury her there. Well, it's okay. But that wasn't what he wanted. What he wanted was to bury her in her place, where she belonged, where they would own it. And he insisted, and the person charged him quite a hefty price, and Avram paid for it. And this was the beginning of our owning the land through buying it, even though God had given the promise that we would have it. And there's also a deeper dimension to this, that this is, the sages say that Adam and Chava were also buried in Machpelah, and they were the ancestors of the entire human race. So before Sarah's burial, the cave of Machpelah shared a connection with all of mankind. We've spoken about that, how God originally wanted that all of mankind should know God and make this a godly place. Eventually, all of mankind will know that there is one God, but the people were not willing to do it. And we spoke about about Noah and how his generation just wasn't willing, and more wasn't willing. And there were individuals who were willing, but as we said, finally what it came down to was that Abraham was going to be the one, through the family that he was being given, Abraham through Yitzchak, and as we see in this Parsha, and then later on Yaakov, would become the people who inherit the work, inherit the responsibility to make this a place where God is known in the world. So now this site becomes, now that Sarah's there, the site becomes again honed into a place of Jewish ancestry. So Sarah's son was promised to be the progenitor of Avram and Sarah, the continuation of building the family who would become completely dedicated to God. And the Parsha continues that now that that Sarah is buried, and in a place that they own, and in a place that would become a place that shows the Jewish heritage moving forward, now what does Avraham do next? And I have to say that one of the things that we really see in this Parsha is everyone's focus and dedication in going forward. Because even though he had lost his life's partners, he didn't sit there and cry. Yeah, he cried for a week. It was the Shiva time. And then he said, no, I have to keep going forward. What does my wife Sarah want? And he knew that what was needed was the vision to have the right person for Yitzchak to marry, so that all the promise of all the children that would come through Avram and Sarah could be realized. So soon after Sarah's passing, Avram sent his servant Eliezer to bring back the girl who would be suitable for his son Yitzchak. Now, this is the first marriage situation of people getting married and how they get married that we see in the Torah. And there's a lot to learn from that. So Sarah knew what kind of girl would be suitable for her son. And she had given this over to Abraham. And the entire narrative of Eliezer's journey and the selection of Rivka reflects Sarah's initiative, ensuring that the wife chosen for Yitzchak would serve as an appropriate channel for the blessings of Abraham's household. So they were thinking who would be a channel for these continued blessings to actualize them. So although Eliezer was a devoted servant and a diligent disciple of Aaron, he was a Canaanite. And when he proposed his own daughter as a match for Yitzhak, Abraham refused. Not because she wasn't a nice girl. Of course, she was a nice girl. Eliezer was a wonderful servant. But he knew that that wasn't what he was looking for. In other words, it wasn't only his emotions, it was his mind saying, how can we go forward in the right way? So he also told his servant that he could not bring a girl from the surrounding Canaanite dwellers of the land who were steeped in idolatry. Yitzchak's wife had to come from the same roots that made possible the focused spiritual purpose and kindness exemplified by Avram and Sarah. So he also answered Eliezer's question. Eliezer said, well, if I'm having trouble finding the right girl, maybe I should bring Yitzchak with me and he'll recognize the right girl. And he answered this question saying that he could not bring Yitzchak out of the land. Just like Sarah remained focused on her purpose, we see that the building of the generations came through having the right, purposeful focus. Yitzchak was forbidden to leave the Holy Land because he was consecrated to God when Abraham offered him as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. So Yitzchak got some special status because he was offered to Hashem. So Avram sent his faithful servant Eliezer to his own hometown of Aram Naharaim to find a suitable girl for Yitzchak. That was someplace now called Syria. Eliezer did his mission and returned to Canaan with Rivka. Now, this is a whole interesting story. The Torah relates the entire account of Eliezer's mission in great detail, repeating entire segments of the story several times. That is not usual. The Torah doesn't usually tell a story, tell it again, and tell it again. That's not usual. So what's the lesson that the Torah wants us to derive from Eliezer's mission? So for one thing, we have to see that a shaliach, somebody that somebody sends on a mission, is like the person who sends him. So Abraham invests himself in this. He actually gives Eliezer a paper saying, all the money that I have is, you can use it. In other words, in case he would have to pay an amount of money for this person that he was going to bring back. So Eliezer was, and how did Eliezer see himself? As a servant. He was very humble. And we see the tremendous dedication that Eliezer had to his mission. So when he arrived in Aram Naharaim, he went straight to work, immediately starting the search for Yitzchak's future wife. And it's a whole interesting story how he says to God, please give me the person who's going to be kind to me, the person who's going to offer me water to drink, and my 10 camels, the one that would want to water 10 camels. This is a huge amount of water. And she's a young girl. But what was he looking for? He's asking for help in finding a girl whose kindness would be exemplary. He asked God to show him this girl who would offer to give water, not only to him, but to his camels, a girl who would be so dedicated and loving and giving, and that's what he knew that was needed. So Rivka was so connected to her inner righteousness and generosity that she offered even before being asked. She didn't say to herself, well, he looks like a strong man, he can handle his own camels. She said, I could do this for him. Let me offer him. And even after he found Rivka and saw that she was worthy for his master's son, he still didn't allow himself to relax. He was on the job. That's something we all have to learn, that we're here for a purpose and we need to be focused on the job. So when he was invited to Rivka's home and the entire family sat down to eat, he said, I will not eat until I have spoken my words. I am Abraham's servant. In other words, he was saying, I'm here for a purpose. I'm not eating, I'm not relaxing until I accomplish my purpose. So when Rivka's family requested that she should be given a few months to prepare herself for marriage, sounds reasonable, but we know that Rivka's family were not such nice people, as we will find out in future parshas. And really, they were stalling. And he wasn't going to take that. He said, do not delay me, send me away, and I will go to my master. And it's interesting that Avram's servant, this is an interesting quality that he got and learned from Abraham. He didn't feel pushed to go along with the norms of society. He didn't, just because they said, well, we kind of do this, we let the girl get ready for a while. Whatever they said, he knew what he had to do. And he went forward to do what he had to do. And he knew, because he trusted in God, that his mission would succeed, even if he was asking for something impossible. So he didn't care what the nations of the world thought. He didn't care what Rivka's family thought. He knew she's the right one. She needs to come. Now, Rivka, this young girl, told her family that she would go. She said, I'm going. She didn't say, Ma, Dad, do you mind if, no, she was strong. I'm going. And she had this inner strength and focus to recognize her mission in the world. And it's so interesting that we will see it, that she learns from her family, who were also idolaters and not very nice people. She learns to know the difference between what is good and what's not good, what's good and what's evil. She knows the difference because she's seen it, and she's not affected by them. She sees this is right and I'm going. So she didn't ask for permission. She intuitively knew. And with her goodness and desire to go forward in the best way, and she knew marrying Yitzchak would bring her forward. So she just focused on her truth, and she focused on living her truth. And she says, I'm going, and that's it. So we too are emissaries. We were sent to the world by the Almighty to create a marriage, to bring together two opposites, creator and creation, all of us with God. We can and will accomplish this task because God placed within us the ability to accomplish our purpose. So we can transform ourselves, our families, and acquaintances, and indeed all of creation into spiritual entities. We can become people who are awakened to who we really are, souls in bodies, and be suitable to be God's bride. So we always have to remain focused on the mission. We always have to have proper priorities, always remembering what's important in life. And that's not always easy, because people could get very sidetracked by what's going on, by the news, by our feelings. And we have to be careful not to be sidetracked, that we have to ask, what is it that God would like me to do now? What can I do that will make a difference in the world? What is my mission at this moment? And this is the lesson we learn from Eliezer, by the Torah repeating the events of his work several times. He just kept going forward. He prayed, he found her, he recognized her, he asked for permission to take her with him. They kind of waver. He keeps going. He's not finished with this. She says yes. And when Rivka says yes, the family realizes, I guess we have to let her go. She really wants to go. What can we do? And he keeps going until he goes. And so we learn that he doesn't give up. So in Parsha Chayei, we're reading about this first shidduch in history. Rivka is chosen to be Yitzchak's wife. Why? Not because she was beautiful, which she was, but because of her kindness. So we see this as an important trait in finding the right person, someone who was kind. So the servant and his group returned to the land with Rivka. When they arrived, This is one of my favorite parts. Rivka saw Yitzchak praying in the field. And again, she intuitively recognized him as the one that she would marry. It's really interesting that she almost falls off her camel. She says, "Is that?" And he says, "Yes." And she veils herself and she's very humble. And she writes, "This is the person who's going to marry." She almost falls off her camel because she recognizes, and he's praying when she recognizes him. And she sees his qualities intuitively. And this is what she wanted. So now we have another character here who has to be part of this marriage, and that's Yitzchak. How would Yitzchak recognize the person to marry? It's a wonderful, wonderful part of this Parsha. Sarah had raised Yitzchak with her values. So now Sarah raised him. He knew what his mother thought was the right kind of person for him to marry. Avram had sent his servant with clear guidance. Not from there, has to be there. You can't take him there. So he had clear directions. And God gave Eliezer the blessing to recognize Rivka's kindness and generosity. Rivka said, yes, she's going with him. So now what? Well, what was he looking for and how would he know? So what did he do? It's very interesting. I like this story very much. That he doesn't just say, "Oh yeah, she's so cute." No, she doesn't say, "What a beautiful girl." Sure. He doesn't say, "Well, my father chose her, so okay." He has clarity of mind, and he brought her to stay in his mother's tent until it would be clear to him to know if Rivka was suitable to be his wife. So in other words, he watches her with his mind, not only with his heart or his emotions. So in Bereshit Rabbah, it comments, throughout Sarah's life, 3 miracles took place in her home. A protective cloud, representing the divine presence, which hovered over the tent, the entrance of her tent. A blessing was present in her dough, and her candles would burn from one Shabbat to the next. She would light it on Shabbat, and it would be lit for the whole week until it was time to light again. Now, these 3 special mitzvot were present in Sarah's home. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because this affected him very much. Her son saw these miracles, and it made him understand in some ways who his mother was. And these are commandments that we also do to this day and further. And these qualities were later paralleled in the miracles of the temple. So the temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem, may it be immediately. And we also have the temple in our hearts, in the center of our being. And these 3 mitzvot that we do, they are connected to the miracles of the temple. So her Shabbat candles brought the glow of spirituality into the darkness of the weekday, just like the candles of the menorah burned brightly until the next day's lighting, when a new growth could be experienced. So the candles of the menorah stayed lit until the next day, when the lamps were cleaned out and relit. And this has to do with new growth and new light in our lives. Sarah's challah, her bread, was blessed. Her guests felt satiated for a long time. A little bit of challah went a long way in them feeling satisfied. And this is parallel in the temple to the lechem hapanim, the showbreads of the temple. These are in the holy, right in front of the Holy of Holies, both the menorah and the showbreads. And they remained warm and fresh for a whole week. So these breads were baked, placed into the holders for the breads, and they stayed warm and fresh for the whole week until they were replaced with new ones. And they were always satisfying and filling for whoever ate even just a small piece of them. The cloud of the divine presence over Sarah's tent affirmed the greatness within their tent, just like the Shekhinah, God's presence, felt at home in the Holy Temple. And we see that in the temple that there was a clouds of glory above the temple, which was the Shekhinah, God's presence. So the lesson behind Sarah's life was simple. Transform your home into a spiritual sanctuary, a refuge from what was going on out there in the world. So our home has to be a spiritual sanctuary, no matter what's going on out there. So the message radiating from her tent was that the Jewish home has immense potential to be a holy place. So these three mitzvahs also represented the three special mitzvot entrusted specifically to the Jewish woman. And we see in this parsha how much of this is about the Jewish woman. Chayei Sarah. It's about Sarah keeping herself going even after she left the world. And then about Rivka and how Rivka's quality would help the next generation and the next generation to go forward, always. So lighting candles to bring, these are the mitzvahs that we do now, lighting Shabbos candles to bring in the holy day of Shabbat, taking challah, separating a piece of dough and making a blessing, consecrating it to God. Nowadays, that piece is burned, but in the time of the temple, it was given, it will be given again to the priests, the Kohanim. And the mitzvah of family purity, which governs physical conduct between the husband and the wife, represented by the cloud, which hovers over the two of them. So the challah elevates the realm of physical and material reality. The Shabbos candles elevate the realm of the spiritual and abstract. And the laws of family purity elevate the realm of interpersonal relations. And each of these special mitzvot shows the power of taking an ordinary physical event and infusing it with greatness. And we see that the one act of lighting Shabbos candles changes everything. We feel this when we do it, that we light the Shabbat candles and we bring in the holiness of the Shabbat experience, and the room still looks exactly like it did seconds before, but the home has been infinitely changed. We feel them when we light the Shabbat candles, everything changes. The home now goes into Shabbat, which is a whole new realm. And we feel a peaceful aura and special blessings in the holiness of the Shabbat. So we're making a holy dwelling for God. And the challah dough acknowledges that all of our basic needs are provided for by God and can be elevated. So everything that God gives us, all the gifts that we have, everything is coming from God. God is taking care of us. So when we lift up this dough offering, we're directing all of our physical needs and experiences to a higher spiritual purpose. And in the laws of family purity, we show how even the most physical of drives, within this, we can live sanctified lives. We invite God into the bedroom as there is no area devoid of him. These are the special laws of mikvah and all that goes with this, which are all the mitzvot of the woman. The woman is responsible for all of these. So each of these three mitzvot teaches us how to grasp an ordinary physical experience and make it extraordinary by infusing it with a glow of meaning and purpose. And this is what Sarah did. Everything that Sarah did, she managed to find goodness and beauty and holiness. So here we have now, Yitzchak has brought Rivka to his mother's tent, and it says, And Yitzchak brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother, and he took Rivka, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Yitzchak was comforted for the loss of his mother. The order of these are very interesting. Rashi comments that it's the way of the world that as long as a person's mother is alive, he's attached to her. But as soon as she dies, he finds comfort in his wife. So when Yitzchak brought Rivka into the tent, this was more than just finding comfort from the loss of his mother. Rashi says he brought her into the tent, and behold, she was Sarah, his mother. She became the likeness of Sarah, because as long as Sarah was alive, a candle burned from one Shabbat to the next, the blessing was in the dough, and the cloud was attached to her tent. But when she passed away, these things stopped. And when Rivka arrived, they returned. As soon as Rivka entered the tent, Yitzchak observed that she was just like his mother. All this continued. And it's very interesting because the law is that we have to light Shabbat candles. If there is no woman in the family, if there's no wife, the man has to light the candles. So he did. And he was great. But his candles were regular candles. They burnt just whatever the amount of oil there was in them, and then it stopped. Abraham did not have candles that lasted the whole week. Obviously, Abraham did the mitzvot, but it didn't have the same effect as Sarah's. And when Sarah did hers, then the holiness of the light, everything returned as it had with his mother. And what does it mean that her lights lasted the whole week? It means that her light shined to eternity. And this is something that this power is given to all of their daughters, to all of the Jewish women of all time. So when we light our Shabbos candles, we are bringing light out and eternal light out. So even if we don't literally see our flames miraculously burning for an entire week, their spiritual power, their warmth, and their illumination remains. That's something we can imagine, that we light Shabbat candles. Maybe they are a light through the whole meal. And when we wake up, it seems that they're not a light, but we need to know that they really are, that light continues. So this is our privilege to continue this chain and to light up the world with a candle of the mitzvah and the light of Torah. And the Medrash teaches, if you will keep the lights of Shabbat, I will show you the lights of Zion with the true and complete redemption. And we see people now taking on to keep Shabbat in ways that they didn't expect. People see God doing miracles for them, and people say, now I need to keep the Shabbat. Now I need to put on tefillin. People are doing mitzvot. So we learn a lot about marriage from how Yitzchak recognized his bride. So when it says, and Yitzchak brought her to the tent of Sarah, what was he doing? He was looking to see her qualities. And when he saw they were right for the continuation of his line, now his mind said, she's just like my mother. She does all the same things. She gets all the same results. This is good. And then he took Rivka, and she became his wife. Only then did he marry her. Obviously, he liked her, but only then did he marry her, when he saw that she had the qualities. And then it says, and he loved her. So he sees the qualities, he marries her, and then he loved her. Only then did he allow his emotions to build a loving marriage. Marriage qualities first, and then love. And Yitzchak was comforted for the loss of his mother. Now he lived with the wife who would bring goodness, kindness, and the right qualities further into his life and into his future family. At the end of the Parsha, this is so important to learn this, because very often people think you like somebody, so you marry them. And that, as we see in the surrounding culture, people get divorced a lot because they say, sure, I liked her. So now but wait a minute, now I see who she is. What was I thinking? You weren't thinking. That's the point. You have to think, you have to look, you have to see who is this person. Does she have the qualities that I need to bring me and my family forward? Does she have the eternal qualities that I want? And if she doesn't, don't marry her. That's what the man has to think. She obviously also has to see that he has the qualities that she wants, but she did see that. She saw him praying and almost fell off her camel. So she saw that right away, but she intuited it as well. At the end of the Parsha, Avram takes a new wife, Keturah. Now, some say this is Hagar, who did tshuva and waited for him. She wasn't with somebody else. And he has 6 additional sons. Now, to these sons of Keturah, he gave gifts while he was still alive. That's what it says in the Torah. He gave gifts, and while he was still alive, he sent them eastward to the eastern lands, away from his son Yitzchak. So he gave them certain gifts. Probably most of the religions of the world come from Abraham one way or another. It's a whole story in itself. But only Yitzchak is the one who is going to follow in his path. So although Avram fathered these children, he gave everything he owned to Yitzchak. That's what it says. He gave everything he owned to Yitzchak. And that means spiritually and physically. He had plenty to give others, but they were still others. And to Yitzchak, he gave everything he owned. So as Sarah wanted, Yitzchak, her son is the one who continues the line that is to become the Jewish people. So at the end of the Parsha, Abraham dies at the age of 175, and he's buried next to Sarah in Machpelah. So regarding the question of why a Parsha that deals with the death of Sarah is given the title, The Life of Sarah, the answer is that our lives, and we are also all the descendants of Abraham and Yitzchak, Abraham and Sarah. And it's very interesting that people who convert, righteous converts, who convert according to the halacha, are also considered to be the children of Abraham and Sarah. And so our lives are measured not only by what we do as individuals, but by what we do for our family and our posterity. When we read of Yitzchak's marriage to Rivka, the next generation of Jewish continuity is assured, and we know with certainty that Sarah truly lived her life meaningful, productive, powerful, and therefore eternal. Now, in bringing forward the mitzvahs and the focus on our life's purpose, we continue to make the world a place where God is known. So we have to know the difference between good and evil, to know what to choose and what to reject. And we see this in Sarah. She says, this is not good. This has to go. And we have to see what brings life and what needs to be nurtured. And we have to choose this. So whether it is in children that we bring forward or raise, or whether, as the sages say, the deeds of the righteous are their children, in whatever we do, whether they are biological children or people that we make a difference for, or deeds that we do that make a difference in the world, or whatever mitzvot we do, we can bring the DNA of our ancestors that's in us forward. That's what each of us is here to do, bringing light and life out into the world. So may we do this and bring God's light into the world to be known. Amen.